We are on Unit 2, Intermediate Fishing, and we are going to talk about finding fish. I've done extensive research over the years and have determined 100% of the time you are not going to catch fish someplace that has no fish. So if we can figure out where the fish are, obviously we're going to greatly increase our chances of catching fish. Whenever we're thinking about where fish might be hiding, keep three things in mind. Fish need food, protection, and comfort. This lesson we're going to concentrate on food, what fish eat. If we can locate the source of the food that fish are eating, we're going to find a fish. There was an old fisherman, very wise, very successful, and some young new fishermen came up to him and asked him where the fish are, and he replied, "I don't know." They were kind of puzzled by this because he was such a great fisherman and everything. And just as he knew he had him hooked, he added, "I don't care where the fish are. I care where the bait fish are." Hence, let's dig into this. There are three different categories of things that fish feed on. One is forage fish, aquatics, and terrestrials. Forage fish are things like blue-nosed dace. Throughout Indiana, throughout North America, you notice that little red stripe right down where the lateral line would be. A lot of our lures that we use the same coloration and pattern as the blue-nosed dace. We also have the fathead minnow. These are the ones that you will be buying whenever you go to a bait shop and buy minnows. These are raised in the southern states, Alabama, Mississippi, very large aquaculture farms that supply minnows literally throughout North America. It's a phenomenal operation. Then we get creek chubs. If you take a wade through the mighty Jordan River on the IU campus, you will find creek chubs. As a kid growing up in eastern Ohio on farmland, we had a creek that ran through our farm, and I spent just hours and hours and hours fishing for creek chubs. I called them, the poor man's trout. These things would get 8, 10 inches, sometimes 12 inches. I mean, fairly decent sized, fish for a creek that in some places you could jump across, or when you're 10 years old you could jump across. Not bad eating. There were many a times that I would leave home in the morning and with the admonition that I was to be home before dark, and I'd go down to the creek. I always kept a spool of fishing line stashed under a rock down there, and some hooks, and I would cut a branch, tie the one end of the fishing line onto it, tie the hook on the other, dig around under some rocks and stumps and turn over clumps of dirt until I found some type of bait, and bait that up, spend some time fishing, catch some of these, build a fire, cook the fish over the fire, no utensils, and thought it was absolutely great fun. Remember, this is before Xbox, Nintendo, Switch, so on and so forth. So if you ever get an opportunity, take a look at a creek chub. These are really prominent during the spawning season. Their fins turn a really bright orange, and they're just absolutely gorgeous during the spawn. Golden shiner, this is another fish that you'll find in bait shops and naturally growing in the lakes and reservoirs in Indiana. Striped shiners look very similar. The shiny, flashy fish that you'll see a lot of the lures imitating. And then the gizzard shad, which we've talked about extensively in class, and how this was a ill-planned introduction into Lake Monroe, and all of the causes, all of the problems that this fish has caused. Now let's talk about aquatics. Aquatics are creatures that live in the water that are not fish. Right here is an illustration of an aquatic worm. And if you go to that website right there that you can barely make out, troutnut.com, there's a whole bunch of more information about aquatics. Aquatic worms are fascinating. There's like a billion different species of aquatic worms. And what's so unique about them is that they are different colorations. As I mentioned in class one time, everybody was fishing black plastic worms, and I could not figure out where they were getting black night crawlers until, these are aquatic worms, and they do come in black and purple and yellow and white and just all kinds of different colors. They're also unique in that you will find different species of aquatic worms located in different bottom types, and we'll get into that a little bit later, I believe. Leeches, an aquatic. I hate leeches. Oh God, I hate leeches. I used to get leeches on me when I was a kid. I hated leeches. If you ever want some really good leech footage, watch The African Queen with Humphrey Bogart and, I forget her name, Katharine Hepburn. And there's a scene in there that will absolutely make your skin crawl if you are adverse to leeches. They do catch fish. If you're a fly fisherman, you may have used a woolly bugger. And it's a fly, black, very feathery, and it is designed to imitate the leech in the water, and it can be absolutely dynamite on largemouth bass when fished around vegetation. Crayfish. I've never found anyone who fished for bass with crayfish that did not catch bass. I mean, this is just almost a guarantee that you are going to catch bass. The larger the crayfish, the larger the bass you're going to catch. Small crayfish, like maybe an inch, 2 inches, are going to catch the smaller bass. If you put a 4-inch crayfish on there, I mean, something that could eat, smaller fish, you're going to get a big bass. You just engulf them. I've gutted bass that were just packed full of crayfish, very large crayfish. It's amazing. Typically, you will hook a crayfish either through the tail, right back here, with hook coming up like so, or through the carapace, the hard shell, right up there. Both ways work very well. The idea is that you want some mobility with a crayfish. Make him look as natural as possible. Now we go into nymphs, and there's, oh crap, I'm sorry, I thought I took that out. Sorry. I'm not sure how that got in there. Nymphs. Nymphs are little insects. The different stages of an insect's development, from egg all the way up through adult. This is the nymph stage. These guys have hatched from the eggs, and they're stuck on the bottom of rocks in the stream bed or in the lake. They'll be attached to vegetation or stumps or things like that, and they're growing, and they're making their way into the adulthood stage. Fish absolutely love nymphs. Trout especially bluegill, especially crappie. Nah, not so much. They're more into to minnows. Largemouth bass are not going to really chase down a nymph. If one's presented to them, they're certainly going to eat it. Particularly trout, particularly bluegill, just go nuts over nymphs. And a little pop quiz here. Of these 3 images with 4 nymphs in it, one of them is not real. I would like you to tell me which one. Let's talk about terrestrials. Terrestrials are animals that live on land that find themselves in the water. Here's a picture of a grasshopper, huge food source for fish. Well, how do grasshoppers that live on land get in the water? Mainly wind. Because as these guys fly, they can get blown off course and they end up in the water. And so a really windy day is a really good time to use a grasshopper. How do you catch grasshoppers? Very carefully and with great patience. If you are taking kids fishing, this is wonderful. Make them run out through the fields and the meadows chasing grasshoppers. You will wear them out. And they're most easily caught with some type of a net, a collector's net. You can catch them by hand. You have to be very stealthy and very quick. I generally hook a grasshopper right behind a carapace, right up here, just by passing a thin Aberdeen hook, something with a thin wire. Cricket hooks are very good for this. Now, grasshoppers are interesting to use as bait. And before you actually fish with a grasshopper, I would recommend that you go out and observe a grasshopper in the water, i.e., catch a grasshopper, throw it in the water, watch what happens. It's really interesting because a grasshopper hits the water, and it's like, oh crap, I'm in the water. I could be eaten. And so they'll be really, really still. And then after all the rings fade away, then you'll see the grasshopper do 2 or 3 kicks to kind of orient himself back towards shore. And then he'll be still. And the rings will fade away. And then he'll give a series of kicks. He's kicking 6 inches, maybe 8 inches towards the shore, and then he'll stop. And he'll let the rings fade away. I mean, he's thinking, if I'm really quiet about this, maybe I can get back to that low-hanging piece of grass that's hanging into the water at the shoreline, and I can crawl up on that, and I'll be safe from largemouth bass. And then he'll give another series of kick. Then he'll stop. And this will go on until he's just in sight of that blade of grass at his salvation. He'll do one final kick. Now he's in the belly of a largemouth bass. Observe natural baits in the wild. That will show you how fish feed and what they're feeding on. And the closer you can match the naturals with your artificials, the more successful you're going to be. Crickets are a fantastic terrestrial bait to use. As we mentioned in class, pet stores are a really good place to buy crickets because they're cheaper. Ants are a favorite food of bluegill and panfish, trout. Fly tyers always have an array of ants in usually black, red, brown in their fly boxes. Spiders, again, fly fishermen will tie up sponge rubber spiders. These are little pieces of sponge for flotation, and then some rubber legs that imitate the spider legs. Bees, fly fishermen have what's called a McGinney wet fly, and that is tied with black and yellow chenille. It's think of it as a yarn, and this imitates a yellow jacket, which is a favorite food of fish and the most despised bee of homeowners, ranchers, farmers, and little kids that are 7 years old gets stung 27 times whenever he stepped into a yellow jacket nest. But just saying. Earthworms. We've talked about in class night crawlers, grubs, bee moth, which are basically just a larva. Again, if you're taking kids out fishing, make them gather their own bait. I mean, spend 45 minutes in the backyard digging holes, and you're going to expend some energy. You're going to wear the little buggers out. Okay, so that's a kind of a quick wrap up of natural food that fish eat, and so now let's go into protection.